Hello, we are back again. Have you ever wondered what it meant in Hebrews when it talks about us resting in God's finished work? Now, we all know clearly that we have work to do while we're here. And it doesn't mean that we just sit and God does everything. No, it means that we're resting or relying in God's finished work. This is very important when it comes to family. Once again, this video is Family Stability 17b. Well, there's a big difference between us and the animals, and I've been saying this a lot, but I'll just point out another difference, really. Animals are nature-driven, where humans are nurture-driven. It's a big difference. So, as an example of an animal being very nature-driven, an extreme example would be a snake. I saw a little baby black snake the other day, and that snake doesn't know who his mom is. She left before he hatched. And she didn't need to stay because snakes need zero nurture. Along with most other reptiles and amphibians and fish. Most of them, they need zero nurture. So that's definitely a nature-driven creature. Everything that God said in the beginning and all the corruptions along the way are encoded in that snake, governing his behavior so that he can survive. Well, that's an extreme example of not needing nurture, but there are some other examples of only needing little or no nurture and can still function well. I'll give you an example in my own experience. Some friends of ours, their son did a science experiment, and so he took a chicken egg, put it in an incubator, and turned it every day and did all that. And then at the end of the project, it hatched, and he showed the little chick to the class. But he wasn't interested in keeping that chick. But when my 3 little girls heard about that chicken, Daddy, can we have him? So I let them have this little chicken. Now, the thing had never seen any other chickens before. He didn't know who his mother was, just like the snake didn't know who his father was. We brought that little chick home, and those girls raised that thing more like a human than a chicken. But they raised him from a little peepee to a full-grown rooster. And so by the time that he was fully grown and he started crowing, they named him Mr. Ed, by the way. By the time he was fully grown and started crowing, I said, I need to get him some hens. So I went to the feed mill and I bought 12 pullets. Now, a pullet is a hen that just started laying or is just about to start laying. I went and bought 12 pullets. Now, here's the crazy part. That rooster, having never received any chicken nurture, driven only by his nature, performed as a rooster just as well as any other rooster, if not better. And for those of you who are not familiar with chickens and you've never had yard birds, here's what roosters will do. All of them do this. They'll scratch the grass until they're down in the dirt, just under the sod. And just under the sod are all kind of little slugs and worms and insects, all kinds of goodies. I'm just getting hungry thinking about it. But he would scratch up these slugs, and then he would do this deep growl. And those of you who've had a rooster, you recognize this. He would go like, oh. When the hens heard that, they ran from every corner to get those treats, to get those slugs and the insects. I've seen Mr. Ed, at times there's cherries, and the branches is way too high to reach. He will fly up, jump up, grab the branch, and bring it back down and hold it down while all the hens eat off of that cherry tree. He won't eat one cherry. He won't eat one slug. I actually have a video that I should post it of a rooster. Someone's giving the rooster treats, and as soon as they get in his beak, puts it down for the hens, puts it down for the hens. He doesn't eat any of it. And I had mentioned that if a mother hen has feed but it's in a container that her peeps, her babies, her chicks can't get to, she'll take beaks full of feed and put it on the ground. Put it on the ground for her children to eat. And she won't eat any. Well, strangely enough, a rooster does the exact same thing for a hen. If you were to put feed, excuse me, I'm sorry. If you were to put feed in a container that could only be accessed by the roosters and the hens couldn't reach it, that rooster will do the exact same thing for the hens that the hens did for their babies. That's quite fascinating to note that my rooster, Mr. Ed, did all those things without any nurture. He didn't have a daddy rooster teaching and telling him how to behave. He didn't have a mom showing him or anything like that. He was on his own. I'm so sorry. He was hatched in an incubator. So he had zero chicken nurture. Now, my 3 daughters, they were all young, they made up for it. They gave him plenty of nurture, but it wasn't chicken nurture. See, they're not wired to create the nurture to awaken the potential and nature of a rooster. However, that rooster being more nature-driven than nurture-influenced, he was able to behave exactly like every rooster has behaved since the beginning of time. Some roosters are a little more, some are a little less. It depends on how much of the good they get out of the genome for whatever reason. Now, I just want to highlight that difference between animals and humans, because animals are nature-driven. That's why you see the same behavior thousands of years later. Horses today behave just like the horses of Egypt 2,000 years ago. Frogs are still acting like frogs. Hawks, they're still acting like hawks. Owls, pigeons, dogs, etc. Their behavior is pretty constant, pretty consistent. Now, their behavior can change because of adaptation, but basically their behavior is fixed. That's because animals, for the most part, are nature-driven. Now, humans are nurture-driven. And what exactly is nurture? Well, basically nurture is this: the meeting of a need. That's basically nurture. And so humans then need to get more of their needs met just to function properly as an adult human being. So then human development requires nurture. We don't have enough nature, like the little snake, to just not even know our mom and go out and live, or like the rooster, to not even be nurtured by chickens and still behave just like a rooster. No, humans can't do that. We do have a God-given nature. We're created in His image. We have a God-given nature. However, for us to produce the God-given human, so to speak, takes nurture. More so than any other species, any other creature, or anywhere. Well, when I was talking about the rooster, I was basically talking, I didn't mention the hens, I was talking about male behavior in the animal kingdom. It's an interesting study to look at male behavior in the animal kingdom. Now, where does male behavior in the animal kingdom come from? Well, if it's male, uniquely male, not just chicken behavior, but uniquely male behavior, it comes from his gonads. It's from the rooster's testicles. I mentioned before, too, that there's male authority in nature. One of the few places that you don't see male authority is with hyenas, and I had mentioned before the belief that the male hyenas, who had all the power and all the testosterone, all the male hormones, that they, in a time of food shortage, made themselves more important than the babies. And then over time, the females protecting their babies raised in their testosterone level until now, female hyenas have higher testosterone than male hyenas. And male hyenas are at the bottom of the rank. Why? Because they use their power outside of its purpose. An immediate correction came. So, what is the purpose of power? Parents have power. They need it. But what is the purpose of power? Well, the purpose of power is to care for and nurture the weak. Now, Mr. Ed, that rooster, we had a few hens that were setting hens. A setting hen means a hen that will set down on eggs until babies hatch. Most chickens that you buy from feed mills have been bred out of them so they don't set. But every once in a while, so I had 2 setting hens, and they would raise babies. And so in that first season, I got about 20 roosters, 20 males, which you only need 1 rooster for every 20 hens. So the babies, I had like 20 roosters, and they grew and grew and grew. And then when they reach sexual maturity, they crow. That first morning that those roosters start crowing. Well, actually about the 4th or 5th morning when all of them were crowing, 4 o'clock in the morning, you just hear, it's all over the place. Annoying. But anyway, those roosters behaved just like their dad. Not because of nurture, but because of nature. So they would scratch up slugs, and then they'd do, and all the hens would run and get the treats. They'd pull the branches down just like their dad did. They would protect those hens at any cost. The rooster, Mr. Ed, we had a neighbor with a really big dog. Now, the neighbor was far away, but the dog would get out of his fence to come and play with our dog. This is a huge dog, and this dog came down, and Mr. Ed just went in that dog's face. I had to stop him quick so the dog wouldn't kill him, but he was protecting the hens. That behavior is encoded in rooster. And so Mr. Ed had sons, and all of his sons, being also roosters, behaved just like Mr. Ed. Why? Those male hormones were the determining factor. Though that roost, Mr. Ed did not decide how he would behave. His sons did not decide how they would behave. They had no choice in the matter. Their instinct, their pre-programming, their program called Rooster, and all the little programs within Rooster totally governed their behavior. We say, well, that rooster didn't have any freedom. Yeah, he had freedom as long as he stayed a rooster. Well, these sons of Mr. Ed, I wasn't going to keep a bunch of roosters. There's no need for them, but they make good food. And so when they get to a certain age, you castrate them. And a castrated rooster is called a capon. And so I castrated all 20 roosters. And the next morning was the first morning that we didn't hear a bunch of crowing. But not just the crowing was gone. See, when we removed their testicles, we removed an entire plethora of behavior. So now these roosters, the next day after their testicles were removed, they're scratching up the ground and they're finding slugs and they're eating them. Now the hens look and say, oh wow, there's a rooster digging up slugs. Yummy, yummy. And so the hens run over, but when the hens get there, the roosters fight them. Smack them with their wings, peck them with their beak, and run them off. These are my slugs. I dug them up. The berries on the trees, none of those roosters jumped up and pulled any branches down like they had done the day before. No, they just jumped up and ate the cherries, and if the hens tried to get any, they would fight them. They didn't people think of masculinity as like, oh, cocky and all that. And it is. Hallelujah. But those roosters, in the morning, they'd scratch around. They would say, I am the man. But once you took the testicles out, they didn't even need to say anything anymore. They didn't even worry about crowing in the morning or being kind to the hens or protecting the hens. They all became narcissists, self-centered, when the testicles are removed. Now, what do the testicles do? The testicles produce male hormone, androgens, testosterone being the top. The testicles produce man hormones. And what does man hormones produce? Man behavior. Let me say that again. The testicles produce man hormones. And what do man hormones produce? Man behavior. Now, I'm going to say it one more time. I know it's sounding ridiculous and foolish. The testicles produce man hormones. And man hormones produce man behavior. So, Mr. Ed's sons went from kindness to the hens to cruelty. Why? Because they no longer had the Word of God influencing their culture medium. So, natural instinct without any male influence kicks in. And what is that natural instinct? Self-preservation. So this tells you something about masculinity. When a man is intact, and he's not a capon, but he's a rooster, everything he does is for everybody else. And I'm telling you, this is the truth. When a man's hormones are working, everything he does is for everybody else and not for himself. But like those capons that I castrated, once they were castrated, everything they did were for themselves and not for anyone else. So would you say that any of those birds were kind? No, they were totally governed by nature. However, humans are different. Because of this, we sometimes place a low value on nature, if we understand it at all. Now, if you look at the rooster, like my rooster, Mr. Ed, he was about this broad. He was a huge bird, tall. He was Rhode Island Red. He was half Barred Rock and half Rhode Island Red, for anybody that knows about chickens. And Barred Rocks are some of the biggest chickens, and Rhode Island Reds are some of the most aggressive. But he was huge. He was way taller than the hens. They came up to his leg. He was more aggressive than them, much more aggressive. Whenever danger came, the hens ran away from the danger, and he, Mr. Ed, ran toward the danger. He had spurs, growing out of his legs that long. Spurs now are like little thorns, little leg thorns. They stick those things in and painful. Well, only one bird in the whole flock had the spurs, the size, the aggressiveness, and that was Mr. Ed. Why didn't the hens have the same thing? They did. They had it in Mr. Ed. See, Mr. Ed played a role that the hens did not play. He provided, he protected, and he was equipped for that. They weren't. I mean, if you ever want to watch any war movie, watch it with your wife. Very few women can make it through a war movie, let alone make it through a war. You see, the roosters were wired to be roosters, and the hens were wired to be hens. Now, this is God's idea. It's not my idea. I'm not making this stuff up. When God decided that, he knew what he was doing because he's wiser than any human being. He's wiser than anyone. So who would be so stupid to think that our ideas are better than his ideas? Like, it's utter stupidity. Now, we don't do it on purpose. Very few people are stupid on purpose, but that still doesn't change the fact. Well, here's a strange thing. The way you think affects your culture medium. Now, once again, I said in the previous video that your body, the skin covered petri dish, and their blood inside is your culture medium, which is influenced by how you see life, what you go through, all kinds of things, temperature, etc. Well, did you know that the way you think controls your hormones? if something is a threat to you, you can't feel afraid until you produce stress hormones. You can't feel afraid. If they've done experiments on rats and they removed in the area of their hypothalamus, they removed the ability to fear. And they could put the rat in with a snake and he just look at the snake like, hey, what's up, buddy? Or the cat and he just look at the cat like, it's just, they removed the ability to be afraid by removing something physical out of his brain. Did you know, as a man, you can lower your male hormones by how you think? Let's say that you were one of those kind of men that listened to the feminist message and you wanted to be a nice guy and everything. Well, you couldn't be a nice guy and also be a big bad rooster. So what do? You subconsciously lower your hormones. Now, I got an apple from this bag. I was employed at a church. I was on staff as a pastor, and it was a big deal to me. I was a senior pastor of a small church, and so it was like, this was moving to the big time, a really big church. And, after a while I noticed, I hope I don't insult anybody, but I noticed that in this stream, it's kind of like a vineyard stream. It's almost not illegal to be masculine. There's like these California casual, easy guys. And so I was looking at all this, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I was like, I wanted to fit in. I'd never been in an environment like that before, and I realized I did not fit in. I was way too masculine for those jokers. So here's what I did. I started changing the way I thought and just trying to fit in. And what I did, without knowing it, was lower my testosterone. Now, look, I haven't exercised since I was 50, and I'm now 63. But look, I'm not showing off. Well, maybe I am. Who cares? Look, see the muscles I have? They're not super big, but I don't have any fat on me, and I don't exercise. The way I think raises my male hormones and keeps my body intact. Now, I'm doing it as an experiment. I'm not trying to say I'm a lazy guy, I don't want to exercise. But at 50, I did an experiment to see if I could go 10 years with no exercise. I eat healthy, but no exercise, and just the way I think, keep my body strong and masculine. 13 years. Well, back then, the opposite happened. I don't know what kind of thinking I was doing, but whatever kind of thinking I was doing was lowering my male hormones. And for the first time in my life, I got a belly, I got soft, I lost definition in my arms, everything. And I didn't do anything different than what I had been doing. And I was like, I need to exercise. I was becoming a fat jello blob. And so I exercised for 3 months and lost 50 pounds and then started thinking like a man again. It was like, give me a headache to think otherwise. And when I started thinking like a man again, my body went right back to being muscular. Isn't that amazing? See, the stuff that I'm sharing with you and I'm about to share with you and I shall continue to share with you is really uncommon knowledge. I'm not boasting. Well, how can I boast? It's really uncommon knowledge. This stuff is uncommon knowledge. Just the way I think. 63. It's not genetics, it's epigenetics. But moving right along, a man can lower his testosterone by the way he thinks and the things that he believes, which is the equivalent of going from rooster to capon. See, the role of the testicles is to produce male hormone. But your thinking can suppress male hormone. And it doesn't make you nicer. It makes you just like those capons. It makes you a narcissist. You know what happens when you, by the way you think, lower your male hormones? You're no longer able to be a father or a husband. They just bound the strong man. And the family suffers destruction. Well, just looking at the animals, I mean, it's a big deal. Just looking at the animals, we get the education that we need. Why do I say we need? God did not, it's a backup plan. Nature is a backup plan. The Bible says the invisible things of God are clearly seen and understood by the things that we but by the things that are made, being understood by the things that are made. So that's a backup plan. Like if you just don't know what's going on, just look at nature. Well, as we look at nature, because I'm right here, what I'm talking about is family stability, which begins with a marriage that's stable and healthy. So looking again at the animal kingdom, you'll see that female need determines male desire in the animal kingdom. Do you see that in humanity? Well, especially not in the church. But no, we don't see that. We have turned it around that everything's about male need and female meets it. That's not true. Okay? When you have cattle in the field, you'll have a bull, and you'll have, let's say, you have 20 heifers. Now, none of those heifers are in heat, meaning coming into estrus, desiring sex, ready to get pregnant. None of them are. You know what the bull does? He just walks around. You could hardly tell him from the cows unless you look close. He just grazes, eats grass, drinks water, just hangs out. Will you ever see him jump on any heifer, for sex? No. He won't do it. There's no reason. You know why? Because she doesn't have a need. So he doesn't have a desire. Now, it's not that the bull is such a gentleman that he thinks in terms of, you know what? I am not going to rape. She had better put out the welcome mat in order for me to go that direction. No, he doesn't think like that at all. But he is nature driven. Meaning that as a male in the cattle species, sex is not about what he needs. It's not about what he wants or anything. It's about what she needs. And when she needs it, and she's an estrus, she will chemically communicate it, and the male will go. Now, at that point, he's not, you know what? That female's in need. My responsibility, I'm going to go ahead and take care of business. No, that's not how the way it comes down is when he breathes it in, it affects his brain and translates her need into his desire. Pretty cool, huh? And so he, the one having the power and authority, goes and meets the need of the heifer. We don't think about it, that the heifer has a need, because we've been taught so much for so long about human females that it doesn't click for us. That female need determines male desire. Now, because we have creative reasoning, we can twist things around and have the wrong nurture to suppress our humanity rather than develop it. And we can go so far as to, we could go so far as to lower the hormone messengers that God gave for us to live right. We can suppress them so that we can make our own thing. See, God created everything good, very good. And then we try to make it better. So going back to the simplicity of what God has supplied is the key. So in the animal kingdom, female need determines male desire. Among humans, that is not the case. We have twisted the story until people are believing, well, men need sex, so women have to be dutiful. Now, this is not just about sex. This whole message is about not losing your salvation. And this particular message is about family stability. And I'm sure some will say, well, what does that have to do with sex? Bonding in the animal kingdom is not a luxury, but a necessity for survival. Bonding in the human kingdom is not a luxury, but it's a necessity for survival. What is bonding? Well, first, let me explain something. Anything that you habitually do, you become chemically addicted to. That's what habits are. If you're talking about the physical world, habits are chemical mixtures that go over a repeated course, like creating a groove. That's how we walk. Like the way I move my hands and walk and use my body, I learned to do that habitually. But after I habitually learned to do that, now all the chemicals necessary for walking, whenever I want to walk, my brain produces them, they come together and I walk. Well, what about fear? You need to be afraid at some time. So whenever you need to be afraid, you can be afraid and you can escape danger. But what if a person's afraid all the time? If a person's afraid all the time, they create a habit of being afraid. That's different than just being afraid in the moment. Now, this habit of being afraid, the only way that it can become a habit is that it has to become a chemical addiction. In other words, the chemistries that the hormones and chemistry that your brain produces, in order for you to be afraid all the time, what makes it habitual is that you become addicted to those chemicals. So if there's no reason to be afraid, you can't find any rational reason to be afraid, you find one. You're still afraid because you're addicted to the chemistry of fear. What about the chemistry of hatred? What if you had a rough time with your dad and bitterness grew up in you and you just walked around in hatred all the time? Well, you can't even feel hatred. See, there has to be protein motors of hatred built for you to even experience it. But once you experience it habitually, it becomes an addiction. That's what an addiction is. It's a habit. That's what a habit is. It's an addiction. And you just keep experiencing it over and over again. And then even when you don't want to hate, you're addicted to hate. You see, our parents, we don't gravitate toward that which is healthy and good and life-giving, but we gravitate toward that which is familiar. Our parents were supposed to familiarize us with that which is good and healthy and life-giving. If they didn't, you end up getting addicted to things that are not good, things that are not healthy, things that are not life-giving. Well, bonding has a purpose. Well, I would say all of nature is governed by natalism. What is natalism? Natalism means it revolves around the young. All of nature, everything that happens in nature, voluntarily, involuntarily, knowingly, or unknowingly, everything revolves around the needs of the young. Everything. Now, how do the animals obey and walk in this reality? Because there are hormones in them that are messengers that dictate their behavior. What if something got messed up? I tell you, like a mother bear, if at the time she gives birth, her oxytocin levels plummet, because it takes oxytocin to give birth, it takes oxytocin for every female reproductive process. But what if she had a hard labor and it took so much oxytocin that she drained her reserves? Right after she gave birth, she'd be exhausted and hungry, and she would eat her babies. Now that same mother, should she have a normal labor and her oxytocin levels are through the roof, she will kill you to protect her babies. Oxytocin low, kill her babies so she can have food. Oxytocin level high, lay down her life for those little things. See that? We don't determine our behavior, our hormones do, that God created, and how we think and what we believe gives us access to His Word. That's what it means to rest in His finished work. Because on the seventh day, He rested, because the sixth day, everything was finished. That's the only work there is, His finished work. We have to plug into it and work out of it. So bonding, when you see 3 to 4% of mammals form a bond, and 3 to 4% of mammal babies need two parents to survive. It's the only reason they bond. The rest of the mammals don't bond. Well, when it comes to birds, the majority of birds bond. I mean, for the obvious reason, the incubation of eggs. One has to sit on the eggs, you need two. And so because you need two, they form a bond. The only reason they form a bond is because of the young. They don't form a bond so they can have great pleasure and wonderful life. No, they form a bond for the sake of the young. Now, oxytocin is the bonding hormone. crazy as it sounds, if oxytocin levels are low, you can't love and you can't bond. Not just as a bear, but as a human. If oxytocin levels are high, bonding happens without you even thinking about it. So when we look at this hormone oxytocin, it's what fuels the menstrual cycle, nursing, childbirth, pregnancy, and many, many other female functions. It's interesting that oxytocin doesn't have as much influence over male behavior. That's interesting. You could almost call it a female hormone, but males do produce oxytocin necessarily. Well, the main male hormone for bonding with a female is vasopressin. I'm not going to go into this stuff so much there, but when it comes to human bonding, there's evidence of a bond. Now, I'll just narrow it right down. I'll narrow it right down to this. When it comes to human bonding, there's evidence. Now, I'm going to give you some evidence that's probably going to make some people turn their head sideways like a calf looking at a new gate. But here's when a woman is totally surrendered to a man and loves him. Now, in order for a woman to totally surrender to a man, he's got to be fully awakened as a man. Or he's not going to, she can be totally submitted, but surrender, there's a difference between surrender and submission, which we may talk about later. Anyway, here are the signs. Get ready. She could be a stick, a skinny little thing. Her breast could be a cup. Flat butt, no hips. In less than a year, much less than a year, she would have double D cups. She would have an hourglass shape. Let me just cut to the chase. She would have an hourglass shape. Now, if you've never heard of that, then you don't know how wonderful of a design that God has established among men and women. It's the truth. It's 100% truth. Why don't we see it everywhere? Now we have the measure of our distance from truth. You get it? See, if what I'm saying is true, that when a woman's really submitted and a man is really taking his place, which is the bare minimum to enter into the mystery of marriage, as far as culture medium, if that's the bare minimum, and evidence of that bare minimum bond is that mama goes from A to D, double D, that mama goes from flat butt to round butt, that mama goes from no hips to hips, that mom's pelvic bones and everything change because of wonderful oxytocin. If that is the truth, that's the measure of how far the average Christian marriage is away from the truth. Now, why is it that far away from the truth? Because of the doctrines of demons that we talked about in the early church that are still teaching today. That's the evidence. I'm telling you, if you don't, you can say you have a bond. I've heard people say, yeah, we have a bond, we have a great this, that. But where's the evidence? I look in Asia and I say, you know what? There's very few real men in Asia, or there wouldn't be so many flat butts. Now, I'm not trying to be vulgar or anything like that, but I know religious people take it that way. What I'm trying to say is, don't lie to yourself. If you don't have evidence of a bond, you should drop everything that you're doing and find out how to get a hold of the finished work of God called marriage. Or don't even get married, because you're just kind of raising kids with a great chance of being slaughtered. I know I sound extreme, but I'll tell you one thing, if you ever saw a woman's body change because of a bond, you'd be asking me, tell me more. In Psalm 22, verses 8 through 10, I'd like to read. I'm reading from the King James Version. This is when they were mocking Jesus on the cross. The 8th verse is when they were mocking him. The 9th verse was his heart response, what he said in his heart during that time. And the 10th verse also. He trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him. Seeing he delighted in him, they're mocking him. Jesus in his heart. But you, O Lord, are he that took me out of the womb. You made me hope when I was upon my mother's breast. I was cast upon you from the womb. You are my God from my mother's belly. That's Jesus. Here where he said, you made me hope upon my mother's breast. That word hope, it means to trust in a good future. So when Jesus was born, now, when he was in Mary's womb, the way Joseph loved Mary, her oxytocin levels overflowed. That means Jesus' first experience was love. And which is all of us, that should be all of us. Well, he's saying, when a baby's born, he's removed from that safe little womb. The umbilical cord is cut. And then the mother nurses him. You see, when he's first removed from his mother's womb, he is separated from that sweet environment of oxytocin, of love. So it's got to be a little startling. Well, immediately she put him to the breast. And the chemical composition of her milk was the same chemical composition of her blood. And when he started to drink, he started to be filled once again with a sensation of love. So then he was separated by birth from love, peace, joy, goodness, and then reunited at the breast. And Jesus is saying, that's when you taught me to have hope. Now, he was saying this while he was nailed to the cross. He was a human being nailed to the cross. And God gave him a promise. And he's saying, you taught me to trust you since I was an infant. From the time I came out of the womb, you've been my God. That's how Jesus was responding to their mocking. Now, why am I saying that? Because the state, the chemical environment of the womb is the determining factor of the development. The environment of the family is the determining factor of the development of an individual, of a child. There's a couple they had been referred to me, and the woman had been traumatized, severely traumatized, since she was a small child. I mean, really, I won't even go through the details, but she was really, really traumatized. And she was so damaged by that she couldn't be left alone with her children because she would try to kill them and kill herself. Severely traumatized. Anyway, this couple came to me, and they were sent to me by someone. So the counselor that had them realized they weren't getting too far, and they asked for my help. And so I said, well, just send the man to me. And so that counselor sent the man to me. And when he came, this is kind of funny because another pastor heard their testimony, how she had been delivered from trauma. It was such a big testimony. And he wanted to know what happened. And they said, well, we met with Eric Smith. And so he came to me and he said, what did you do? And when I told him what I did, I got in trouble. But anyway, for 20 minutes, I talked to this guy. And what I talked to him about was how to stimulate his wife's vagina so as to bypass her emotional memory library with something called an interneuron. Now, what is an interneuron? An interneuron is a nerve cell that doesn't go to the brain. It has prepackaged response so that when stimulus happens, it gives a response before it would have time to go to the brain. Like an example of that is if you touch a hot stove. If a child touches a hot stove, they don't have time to visit the brain to find out what do we have on file about hot stoves. But instead, there are interneurons that intercept the message and send a response back, never visiting the brain until after the response. Then it visits the brain to say, hey, here's what happened. Well, so I said to this guy, I told him how to manipulate his wife's anterior fornix. And he manipulated one because a woman at the base of her spine, she has a sexual reflex station. That's where all the interneurons are. So if you manipulate the anterior fornix properly, you can send a signal to the sexual response station, and she will come back with the response of what God said in the beginning, not what she experienced in her life. Trauma or whatever. So anyway, I told this guy, I just gave him simple instructions. I drew some pictures, showed him some examples. He went back and did that with his wife. And then when he did it, he said his wife screamed. She had an orgasm for the first time in her life. She screamed, and when she screamed, she then curled up like like she was in the womb. What's the word? In a fetal position. She curled up, and he said she started crying, and she sounded like an infant, not an adult. So of course this totally freaked him out, and he wanted to comfort her, so he went to touch her, and as soon as he touched her, she screamed, "Ah, don't touch me." Well, whenever he touched her, it burned like fire. So this was really puzzling for them, and they went back to the counselor they were seeing, and the counselor invited me in on that particular session. And so I said to her, I said to the counselor, she trusted the counselor, I said, okay, the counselor's going to touch your leg, and I want you to close your eyes. So she closed her eyes, and I motioned to the counselor, and the counselor touched her leg. I said, do you feel safe? And she said, yes. Okay. No, I did it first with her eyes open. And I said, now close your eyes, and I told the counselor to touch her again. The counselor did touch her. I said, how do you feel? She said, I feel safe. And then I said, I'm going to have the counselor touch you one more time. But this time, I motioned to the husband, and he touched her. I said, how do you feel? She said, I feel safe. I said, open your eyes. She saw it was her husband's hand, and she was like, and then she said, it's all in my head? Now, see, she couldn't know it was all in her head without an experience. So they went back the second time. He did the same thing again, and this time she had a monster orgasm, but she didn't go back into the fetal position. She got set free. Second time, set free from trauma. She had been to deliverance services, mental hospitals, psychiatrists, psychologists, and he played with her vagina and she got set free. You have no idea what God did when he made these bodies. You have no idea unless it's revealed. And that's what I'm speaking from is revelation. And I said at the beginning too, it proved me wrong. So that's, Well, their daughter was off at college. And she came home for a Christmas vacation, Christmas break. And something was different about her mom. She just held on to her mom, followed her around their house everywhere. And then when it was time to go back to school, she said, Dad, I don't want to go back to school. Her father was startled about this. He said, what do you mean, honey? And she said these words. She said, I've never had a mom before. I don't want to leave. Amazing, isn't it? I know these testimonies are like super duper, and none of them are spiritual. All natural. As miraculous as it may sound. Why am I even going over this? Because there's so many old fody-doodies out there get offended by this stuff. Why am I going over this? Because this is very important. You can have the petri dish of a physical marriage, of a legal marriage, and not have the culture medium of love. And you think you do because you're doing everything you read in the book. But what if you're addicted to fear and he's not loving enough to set you free? You won't even know. You'll say, well, we're doing our best. We're trying to be loving. No, what people need to do is hear the truth, understand the truth, until it habitually becomes their behavior. Because everything God encoded in us for marriage and family is inside of us. All we need is the knowledge of the truth. When you are in love, you operate out of your conscious mind 100% of the time. Here's what happens with the conscious mind. The conscious mind goes wherever your interest is. Now, if you're in love and the person's in front of you, your interest is right there, so you're present. When you're in love, you're present all the time. When you get married and get into the grind of life, that's when the subconscious takes over, and all the programs that your dad and mom and that you inherited that were downloaded in you, which misrepresent you, then they kick in, and your spouse is like, where did that behavior come from? So the renewing of the mind is so that we renew our mind according to truth, because the truth that's in us and the truth that we renew our mind to will match. in your mind, imagine your mind up here, whatever you think, however you believe, how you see things, influences your brain, which is the chemist that mixes up the chemical compound of your culture medium that determines the environment where family can develop and grow. And I tell you, healthy family is almost a guarantee of remaining in Christ. Well, enough said. Remember to subscribe and like, and I can't remember the other thing you're supposed to do. Oh, ring the bell. And I'm going to be a good YouTuber sooner or later. See you guys.